I was kind of waking up about once a week, like my hands were swelling up, my face was swelling up, my feet were swelling up. It was quite a shock to know that even though I could do my job at home, that just absolutely wasn't allowed. So I went through about 3 different companies in 3 years.
Today we've got Molly Johnson-Jones, the founder and CEO of Flexa.
Flexibility, flex working, whether it's hybrid, whether it's remote first, can be just as productive, if not more so, for businesses. But just looking at the impact on the UK alone, they think that it could add over 40 billion a year to the UK economy. One of the things that's really holding us back is a lot of leaders' fear of change. Being
remote, you have to put a lot of trust in your team. How do you gauge when the team members are working well or not?
So I think every role needs to come.
Welcome to FounderMetrics by Vested, the podcast where we dive into the world of hotshot business leaders and the specific metrics, not just the usual KPIs, that drive their game-changing companies forward. I'm your host, Ifti Nasser, CEO and founder of Vested, and I'm excited to take you on this journey with me into the world of successful founders. Hi, I'm Ifti Nasser, and this is FounderMetrics. Today we've got Molly Johnson-Jones of Flexa. Hi there, Molly. Do you want to just give us a quick little background on Flexa, who they are and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are the platform making the future of work discoverable. So what that means is we enable people to search by how they want to work, to find the companies that match up with their ideal working environments, and enable companies to get discovered for their version of flexible working, whether that be 3 days a week hybrid through to fully remote, dog-friendly offices, enhanced parental leave, all of those things that people really care about now, but still current platforms and processes make it very difficult to showcase those and get.
Indeed. So I know the story of Flexa is interesting, certainly its genesis, and it started off with a few little challenges for you. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Back when we launched, it came out of a very kind of personal problem that I'd had. So I was got diagnosed with quite a severe autoimmune disease when I was about 18. And I managed to struggle through university and then got a graduate job in investment banking, which is not the most flexible industry that I could have chosen. And I was kind of waking up about once a week, like my hands were swelling up, my face was swelling up, my feet were swelling up. And it made it incredibly difficult to get into the office. And I really did struggle through, like wearing slippers on my commute, trying to cover up the fact that...
very weird.
Sometimes like putting tea towels in the bottom of my shoes, like all sorts of stuff that just to try and get into the office, because it was in 2017 and back then work was only done in an office.
Yeah.
Like there really wasn't such thing as being able to work from home. So I struggled through for about 18 months, and to begin with they were quite supportive, and I think I then was lured into a false sense of security when they said that they were open to flexible working requests. So I was sent to an occupational health therapist to make sure that everything was legal, I suppose. Yeah. He recommended that I be classified as disabled because of the severity of my illness, and thank God he did, because 10 days later a settlement package was put in front of me and I was told to leave immediately.
Oh gosh. So so it wasn't really to help you, it was more a case of assessing what they were going to do with you, for want of a better phrase.
Exactly. I think that was pretty much it. Like how can we legally, without there being too much backlash, get rid of her? And I think, ultimately now, knowing what I know about the world and not being 23, I think I was one woman in a team of about 50 men. So flexible working was not the norm, and there was one other person who was about to go on mat leave, and she was also let go. And the wider team, so bigger company. But I think it was a real shock to me to know that needing to work from home one day a week when I could still fully, properly do my job. Like it was literally just that it was very painful to walk, and I was quite embarrassed when my face would swell up and everyone stares at you. And it was quite a shock to know that even though I could do my job at home, that just absolutely wasn't allowed. So I left, was forced to leave, and started my kind of job hunting process. And I went through about 3 different companies in 3 years, because they would say that they were flexible, and a couple of them were, and one of them really wasn't, where I was kind of sending pictures of my swollen feet to prove the fact that I needed to work from home, and it was exhausting. and eventually landed at a really flexible company. And I asked them why they weren't shouting about it. I had no idea until I joined. I was kind of taking these blind leaps of faith until then. And they said, well, there's nowhere to go to showcase it. Where would somebody look for that information? Yeah. Which then actually, so I started the company with my now husband, and he saw that as a massive opportunity and was like, well, why don't we try and build something to fix it? So here we are.
Well, and I think it's fantastic because it's such an important piece of what I think we do at Vested in terms of the flexibility, because we started in an office down in downtown London at Moorgate, and kicked off this experiment of remote first in 2018, and then by February 2020 we decided we were just going to go fully remote and cancelled our subscription over at WeWork.
Yeah.
A month later we all know what happened, but we'd already set up that remote environment. So it's great to firstly realise that actually what we were doing is quite useful, but we didn't know about Flexa. I guess when we started, Flexa wasn't even there. But now a powerful tool to be able to shout out about how we how we provide that to broader reward package for our team. So tell me more about how Flexa evolved, because it's a tool that clearly we could benefit from ourselves.
Yeah, I think just like every founder building a startup, I think you go through sort of multiple iterations of what your startup really looks like. Mm-hmm. The core idea and principle probably remains the same. Or sometimes obviously there are full pivots, but we did a couple of kind of mini pivots. Just raised our first round of funding with that model, our pre-seed round. And after about a year, we started thinking that actually it would be much more efficient and effective to enable companies to kind of treat their hiring funnel like a marketing funnel. So really focus on top of funnel and awareness and building those brilliant employer brands centered around being fantastic, flexible places to work. So we kind of flipped what we were doing on its head and moved to, I guess, what you could probably compare it to most closely is like a Glassdoor model of those profiles, or Trustpilot, something like that, where you've got profiles with employee feedback. So every company on Flexa is verified by their employees. So we take a statistically significant sample of quantitative employee feedback data. And
how many businesses do you have on the platform now? How many companies are on there?
We've got around 200 businesses on the platform, from very small startups, 5-10 people wishing to be founders flexible, all the way through to companies like Microsoft, BT, Centrica, Mars, big ones.
And that's quite a range. I mean, how do you compare the aspirant startup wanting to be flexible and agile and give the space to their team that the team are looking for, versus a Mars or a Microsoft? I mean, they're different worlds, aren't they?
Very different worlds, I think. Very different use cases as well. So they're all very flexible, and I think it's sometimes even more commendable for a large corporate to maintain flexibility at scale, because it's so difficult to do it when you've got 50,000 people versus 50. But then there's all of the added huge benefits of that we would, of working in a corporate, that we would also class as flexible. So amazing family leave packages, fertility leave, pregnancy loss leave, really generous holiday allowances, all of those things that really do count towards flexible working. I think the media tends to really oversimplify what flexible working is and just says, well, flexible working is just remote. But actually it's built up of a lot of different things, and I think those benefits packages really feed in as well. But the startups and scale-ups that we work with, they do have more freedom, there is more autonomy, there are fewer rules, but it's different vibes for different tribes. Different people want different things, and that's what we're showcasing.
Yeah, and I guess as you say, they have more flexibility, but they also maybe have less depth and capability. If you've got 50,000 people, a handful of people working slightly differently doesn't really make a difference to the game. But if you've got 5 people and 2 want to do something quite different, it's maybe a little bit more complicated and needs a bit more thinking. Not that it's not possible, it just needs to be much more deliberate in terms of how you address it to get them to be able to contribute and to be able to survive as a business, because it's not impossible to do so.
Yeah, and I think, that's also one of the massive upsides of being very transparent about what your working environment is before you hire somebody, is you're going to attract aligned talent that want to work in a similar way. So it's kind of self-reinforcing, rather than, I think, the problem that a lot of businesses are going to face if they're just saying, oh, open to flexible working requests. What does that mean to somebody? And now that the day one flexible working the request to be able to request flexible working from day one regulation has come in, companies are really going to be struggling with people saying, well, I need to work differently, I want to do something different, because it's all a black box. Nobody knows what they're going to get until they get there.
Or indeed how true it is. They may say that they provide X, Y, and Z in terms of flexibility, but in reality it's caveated quite often. This is FounderMetrics. The whole essence of the podcast is trying to help founders look at things above and beyond just the normal ways of assessing or monitoring your business, the MRR, the growth rates, etc. And I know for you guys, it's this concept of companies saved. Tell us a little bit more about what you actually mean by that, because it's an interesting name for a North Star metric.
I feel like it's very specific to us in that sense. So we use, as I kind of mentioned just previously, because we're a B2B2C product, are more important, probably equally, but it's the foundation of then being able to have B2B customers, because what they're paying for is to be seen by, now we have 2.5 million people using Flexa. That's growing by 150,000 new people every month, which is amazing. And, to begin with, when we were growing Flexa and we didn't really have a North Star metric, or not a North Star liquidity metric. So we started to think about what metric is the sort of perfect interrelation metric of, we have lots of companies on site, but not too many, so that not very many companies are being saved. And then that we had enough users, but also that what we were providing them on the other side was interesting. So we spent a long time looking at various different metrics, and actually company profile saves, so much different innovation around that, of matching people with similar companies that are hiring when maybe their ideal company wasn't, being able to advise companies on what other companies that are being saved more are doing. It's an incredibly illuminating metric.
You seem to be very big on sharing those success stories and the advocacy for those people who are doing it well. And do you actually do any, what's the engagement with those that you can see, those who've come onto the platform, want to do a good job, but are maybe not? Or is it only the good ones that turn up and you can just wave their banner for them because they're already really nice chaps and chapesses?
We do get some companies come onto the platform that aren't flexible enough. And so we will give them lots of data in order to say, well, you can come back and try again in 3 months. Sometimes they fail at the point of employee verification, which actually arguably is more interesting, because we can give them all of the anonymised data around where they've scored less well and why they haven't passed. But what we're building at the moment, actually, how they can attract potentially more women into senior leadership, or more people of different ethnicities into various different tech roles, whatever that might be. So because of all of the activity that happens on Flexa, we've got about 450,000 searches happening every single month. We've collected about over 83 million data points now, I think it is.
Wow.
So we're building that into a kind of benchmarking platform to enable them to enable companies to assess what they need to do in order to hit their goals and benchmark themselves against the market.
So you mentioned you have over 200 businesses or companies on the platform today.
Yeah.
How many have applied to be on Flexa? Do you actually reject them, or do you just say, you can't go live just yet, you need to do X, Y, Z? Are there a number that you let go?
Through lots of scraping through different companies using our benchmarking quiz, we know pretty much what the average is in the market, and we recalibrate that every month to make sure that 50% is the true average. And if a company scores below that on their screening, then they're not eligible to be on Flex. So it's about 35% that fail. So that's why we started building the data platform as well, because it's hard as a startup to turn away business.
So in terms of a third of companies not being in the right place at the time of applying to get on Flex, so that's quite a big chunk that you're missing out on, as you say. Do you see that that hurdle? Because again, wanting to keep people on and try to keep the customer is important for a startup. But do you see that hurdle becoming more difficult as you go through time? Do you see that you're going to be lifting the bar, as it were, for flexibility? Because to start off with, this whole thing is pretty nascent as a concept in the mainstream, at least. But as time goes on and more people get into that space, how are you going to help get them moving to the next level, shall we say?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, not just for us, but I think also for society, and how that evolves. I think at the moment we're going through a bit of a reversion to the mean post pandemic, with, I'm sure everybody's seen all the big RTO mandates of 5 days a week back in the office, and the Nike CEO saying that remote working stifles innovation. Most people all over the world in office jobs are back in 3 or 4 days a week, if not 5. And I think a lot of that is because we just haven't had enough time to get enough evidence that actually flexibility is just as productive. Flex working, whether it's hybrid, whether it's remote first, can be just as productive, if not more so, for businesses. And it obviously makes people happier. It's easier to attract talent. Diversity thrives in those kind of environments. But the studies that are on them, there's a fair few very good studies, but not enough for it to be convincing everybody and changing everybody's minds.
Relevant. I think there's certainly from our own experience, there's a massive advantage in being able to access those people who want to contribute, have the skills and capability to contribute, but for whatever constraint, as you mentioned with your own, and there are probably 101 others, they just can't do it in a conventional way. So if you want to access their capabilities, then you have to create that flexibility. And I think learning from other people who have succeeded in aspects of that, if you're on the right track, then that's a good starting point. But then wanting to learn and actually do it better, I think Flexa clearly provides a brilliant opportunity for that. From where the business is today, as I say, it's very similar to Vested. Our whole philosophy being around that whole notion of sharing with your team, giving equity to your team, making it sure that everybody has a stake in the business. Similarly, what you're doing is pushing that boundary of bringing that flexibility. How do you see that changing? We've talked about it being an iterative journey, but how are you going to? How do you see the real? What's the far boundary of that flexibility from your perspective? Is it just doing 15, 20 hours over 2 days each and then you're done? And then the world is your oyster?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we could dream that would happen. I think there's kind of limits of where we'll probably be in our lifetimes. What I think is really exciting is I see flexibility as a spectrum, and every company will have a different balance of remote and in-person time that they think is important. Some companies are going to land on 3 days a week in the office. Some are going to land on 5 days a week in the office. Some companies, like both of our companies, are remote first. And I think that location aspects of flexibility is going to continue to be that sort of spectrum. And I hope that companies are honest and upfront about exactly what they offer. I think what's probably arguably the most exciting evolution of work at the moment is the kind of reduced work week, reducing hours. Because over time we have seen a reduction in how much people work. People used to work 6 days a week in factories and fields, whatever it might be. And we are seeing that, kind of slowly come down, probably less quickly than we'd hope, given all of the automation and AI and innovation that we've seen. But now I think companies are, particularly during the pandemic, I think there was a real push to rethink how we work, because everything that was normal in terms of the world's work was just ripped up. Yeah. And we were all at home trying to make it work. So I think it enabled us to kind of set this foundation of more experimentation. And so there are lots of companies now embracing the 4-day week. We do a 4.5-day week and have done since our inception. 9-day fortnights, companies being much more excited about the concept of compressed hours or part-time workers. And I think that's, to your point of saying about diversity and so many people that could work flexibly. I think the potential that then has for who is able to work. There are millions of people with disabilities out of work because they can't go into an office 5 days a week. There are millions of women that are having to leave their roles because of not being able to balance childcare and their careers.
And you're losing out on such an amazing resource.
Yeah. And I think, I really do think that we are, and people in rural areas, right, that can't commute into cities all the time. There is, and when you look at various different studies that have been done, like we're a global platform, but just looking at the impacts on the UK alone, they think that it could add over 40 billion a year to the UK economy. So
it
that I think
surprise me.
No, I think if anything, when people push back on it and you try to give those facts and figures, the numbers are almost too big that people don't believe it. But it is, it's such an exciting prospect to really level the playing field. And so I think, that's where eventually flexible working is going to go is kind of reimagining working patterns and work time reduction and ultimately making the world of work more accessible, because there's no reason to not do that.
I guess behind it, and it's a challenge that we have in terms of just understanding that contribution, the flexibility of the contribution we've talked about, but the magnitude is the other one. You talked about compressed hours. There are roles where the number of hours doesn't necessarily relate to the output. How are you helping businesses, or how do you plan to help businesses with that side of the equation? Because, if somebody said, okay, we'll go to compressed hours, but we're going to end up with the same output. How do you gauge that output?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and I think it's one of the biggest barriers to ultimately flexible working being totally embraced. Is companies need to move to a more output-driven culture. I think for a very long time, presenteeism has been used as a very lazy proxy for performance. If you can see somebody at their desk, it means they're working really hard. I used to work sitting behind a guy who used to come in at 8 and leave at 8 when most people worked sort of 9 till 6. And half the day he was watching the cricket, and everybody thought he worked incredibly hard.
Yeah, no, presenteeism is bizarre. I mean, so I used to work for a business that used to have alternate Saturdays in. This was in India. And it's incredible, because if you don't give people the time to sort out their own life in their own time, then they have to sort out their life. So it's going to be on your time. It's inevitable.
Exactly.
Yes, they're working so hard. Actually, they're not.
And it's not sustainable. Downtime is productive. You come back, your brain is more refreshed. You've dealt with everything in your personal life. Your work time can be productive work time. And I think that's the kind of the big misconception that I think we're really, really struggling to overcome, is like the number of hours you're working, that's how committed you are, that's how much you want to do your job. And I think there is a fine balance, because also there's a minimum number of hours that you need to do in order to generate enough activity in order to do well at your role. In a lot of office jobs anyway, particularly things like, sales, marketing, whatever it might be.
Sales is very easy. Yeah, it's very tangible, easy to measure. But I think one of the things that might be helpful or useful, certainly from something like Flexa, putting them forward, are those tools that help us gauge different skill sets or different disciplines. Because certainly from I know this the case with Flexa, being remote, fully remote, you have to put a lot of trust in your team. You have to trust them, and that has to be a given. But the other side of that is, how do you gauge when the team members are working well or not? How can you intervene to help them? Because we have no inclination to micromanage people. We have no inclination to monitor their keystrokes or any rubbish like that. But how do you then gauge well and intervene and support where somebody's maybe not doing as well as they could, or where somebody's doing absolutely brilliantly and you want to just shine light on that so that everybody else can see?
Yeah. I think when a company is hybrid or remote, just generally some level of distributed, I always end up coming back to this word intentional. Like, it's a much more intentional management. It's not as simple as going, well, you're underperforming because you're not in enough, or you're underperforming because you're sitting at your desk twiddling your thumbs. So I think every role needs to come with very clear expectations of what targets they are meant to hit, and that may be, it depends on the role. Like, as you said, sales is very tangible. To a large extent, marketing is pretty tangible. Things like operations, less so, a little bit more blurry. Strategy, same. I feel like finance, if they're not doing the job, then you feel it, you know it. But with the jobs where it's very measurable and very obvious, is just making sure that expectations are set really, really clearly, that there are regular catch-ups, whether that's ad hoc or, also having time in to discuss people's career progression, performance, whatever it might be. And almost, I think, in distributed teams, there's this need to over-communicate, because you can't read somebody's facial expression. You can't get a vibe off them when you're in a meeting. And so I think it's setting really clear targets, over-communicating quite often, and making sure that there is enough face-to-face time, like obviously not necessarily in person, but stand-ups, one-to-ones. We do a team meet-up once a month where it's all brainstorming sessions and problem-solving. And we all come together and genuinely do make progress on that day in person, but we only do that once a month at all. So I think it's finding that balance, setting those very clear parameters, and over-communication to the point where if you feel in a distributed team, once somebody is underperforming, like sometimes that's very, very hard to catch, because there will have been signs of it for a while that you just won't have picked up on. So I think it's stepping in quickly once you feel that there's something wrong, making sure that they're okay, and setting them on a clear pathway to be able to measure, can they kind of pick their work back up, or does something need to be done?
On that intervention, on that engagement front, it'd be great to see the new norms, as it were, for those fully distributed companies or fully remote businesses. Because what we try and do is have that engagement. We have 2 stand-ups a week, so these are the whole company, half an hour, twice a week. We do retros and reviews once a month as a company, and in between that, every other 2 weeks, the team gatherings. And then we have 2 retreats where we pull everybody together from around the country and around the world. And I'm wondering whether there's an optimum sort of pattern being built up, and the data that you're collating, which will help us optimize that, such that we're not on overkill or not quite getting that connection right. Are you pulling that data together, or is that something that's, and are you sharing it, or is it something yet to come?
It's something yet to come. I think there's so much that I want to be able to prove. Like, we are collecting a lot of this data, but there's not enough of it at the moment. It hasn't been over a long enough period of time to particularly rely on it. Mm-hmm. But there's so much that I would love to be able to prove, such as, what is the ideal meeting cadence? What are the core ingredients of intentional management for distributed teams? What is the ideal balance of in-person and remote? Or what is the ideal balance of face-to-face time or meeting cadence?
How do you guys do it? How does Flexa do it?
From a kind of meeting, and
from a virtual meeting cadence, from a physical meeting cadence.
We are on a Monday at 11. I do just like a quick, this is what's happening, this is what happened last week, this is what's happening this week, 15-minute update with the team, just so that everybody knows if there's any priorities that week. Mm-hmm. And then the individual teams have stand-ups on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday as well. I think the tech team do every day. And we then also have a brief overall, because we're only 20 people, so we can still have everybody on one call. So on Tuesdays, we do like an update meeting with teams. So what are they working on? Do they need any help? And then we meet once a month with the whole company, because they're all over the UK. But actually about 7 of us are in the office 3 days a week. Just like completely out of choice. It's totally optional, but a lot of people choose to come in. But also coincidentally, a lot of the London-based people live in Hackney, which is where our office is as well. So if you can walk in, then it's nice.
It is, but don't you feel... So how many people do you have in total?
19.
19. And of that, 5 or 6 live in Hackney?
Yeah.
So, interesting. Do you end up with the in crowd? Essentially,
That's
those.
what I was concerned about.
Yeah.
So we always say that we are remote by default. So I think we've actually found a pretty good way of managing it. So we'll be in the office and something funny will happen, or somebody has an in joke, and immediately that's shared with everybody else on Slack.
Right.
So, and same as if, people are traveling and they're going through London and somebody will pop into the office for a day. It's very much a place that people want to come but are not forced to. And we make sure that with the team meeting, the team day at once a month, we go for a team activity. Like we went to bingo last week, and then we'll go for a really nice dinner and some drinks afterwards, so everybody gets to spend proper time with each other. And I think having the remote by default communication where everything that is said in the office is also said on Slack, and then also having that regular whole company get together once a month does help us to manage that pretty well. I think there have been periods of time where we haven't got it quite right. I think when all of a sudden there were 5 people in Hackney when we'd expanded just coincidentally, I think then the people that were remote first maybe felt, oh, is this going to end up like a bit of an in crowd? Are we going to start to move to hybrid? I think there's natural insecurities when you are detached and you're far away. But I think we've overcome it pretty well and created a genuinely very strong culture, despite being a remote first business.
No, I think that's a really good idea, actually. I mean, the fact that we don't have an office, although we used to, there has been, talk or conversations around, should we have little hubs around the country. Certainly when we do I mentioned about doing 2 retreats a year at the moment. That's our flow. We have one where everybody comes together, whether it's from across the UK, and indeed some of our people who are outside of the UK, folk in India, Italy. But then we also do regional retreats where myself and my chief operating officer, Simon, will come around and we'll go to 3 or 4 different locations within the UK, and then maybe Mumbai, and it'll usually be Arthur, who's our head of engineering, who will come out with me there, because most of the Indian team are engineers, but not solely. But as a consequence with that, you get lots of little regional clusters, whether it's the Scotland cluster around Edinburgh and Glasgow, or the Manchester cluster, etc. So you can create that critical mass in different regions. And just as we were talking, I was just wondering whether, if you end up with loads of little hubs, then do you get loads of little in crowds? And how do you make sure that all the stories, as you mentioned about putting stuff on Slack, how that richness of stories within those gets around as well?
Yeah, I think the way that you've described it sounds like a lovely way of doing it. I think different companies have kind of different ways of tackling it, and I think it's it's really something that we've got to be paying attention to and kind of learning from. I don't think that's necessarily a right or wrong answer, but I think if, to the point of being like remote by default, you're sharing pictures and videos and who's around, and I think purposefully making people feel included. And in some ways, somebody does have to kind of be responsible for that. Like I will always do it when we're in the office, and there are a few other people that are obviously very big fans of that as well. So you almost need these like people that are going to push that kind of culture and make sure that it doesn't separate off into those little enclaves, like you said. But I think, we can only learn by doing and getting some things wrong and some things right. But I think,
and then sharing those learnings.
Yeah, exactly. And you think about our qualities of lives now with remote first businesses, and so much better for me, at least, work-life integration. I know for so many people, whether they want work-life balance or integration or blend, there's all these conversations going on. But the fact that we can be having those conversations shows that there has been a genuine step forward in how we work and how happy we can be at work as well.
Absolutely. I mean, for me, it's almost like a mission. I'm so pleased that we've ended up getting to meet, because we're going to be, I think, working closely together for a long time, because every time we come across a problem with being remote, how is that different? How had we been in an office, would it be? Our continual challenge is just to see, how can we fix it? How can we get rid of that barrier to progressing the business, and I want to carry on learning from you guys and all the knowledge and the experience that you're gathering to make sure that we can make the most of that. So really looking forward to that. So tell me, I mean, for you guys, what are the next big things on the horizon if we look the next 3-4 years, because you've only been around for 3-4 years now?
Yeah.
So what's the next half-life about?
For us, we want to become a much more kind of data-driven platform, given all of the data that we've now managed to collect, and to really be able to start influencing the future of work, and to really to be able to answer the questions, that you're curious about, to be able to answer all the questions that our clients come to us, and also to be a positive force for social change as well. I think that's probably one of the biggest ones. It's like when we started out, we really didn't expect to be a social impact startup. And it probably sounds quite naive given what we're doing, but I don't think we really knew the impact that flexible working could have in 2020. And now we've gotten to the point where, if we look at our user base, 76% female, 22% are neurodivergent, 18% of people have disabilities, 28% are people of colour, 25% are of the LGBTQ plus community. That's incredibly diverse. Versus tech companies, actually. Massively. Yeah, it's genuinely this is a professional careers platform. And so we really do have the ability to make genuine social change here, and to enable people to find roles that will enable them to thrive in inclusive businesses, and also not just to showcase those businesses, but to use them as a way to drive change. Because I don't think that the kind of top-down governance of flexible working that's happened with the day one requests and in the past, week 26 or whatever it was, top-down governance of this kind of stuff generally doesn't work enormously well. I think incentivization and showing what a massive impacts and what benefit a business can get from it is the way that we will drive meaningful change. So I would love for us to be at the forefront of that, and to change the way, to make sure that we don't totally revert to the mean and change the way that we work forever.
Yeah. No, well, firstly, I don't think there is a choice of going back to the mean for truly progressive companies. But one of the challenges, just going into that and where the nuance comes in, is that even if a company wants to provide a degree of flexibility, it may well be different with different roles.
Yes.
And I think that's, for me, guidance, advice, insights around handling that different diversity within a single organisation is going to be interesting, and how you manage that.
Yeah, it's super interesting, and different companies really do approach it in different ways, particularly like global multinational organisations. They might have different flexibility in different countries, different roles, different teams.
So you're already seeing that, Holt?
We are, yeah. There's across most of Western Europe and Scandinavia, it's quite similar culturally. The US and Canada, there's a little less flexibility, I guess, as you'd kind of expect, particularly on holiday and hours.
Now, I meant for individual companies, are you seeing that within a company that you see their employees in Europe are treated or given a different level of flexibility to those? Right.
Yeah, we are seeing it. And I think it's because the like statutory minimums in lots of different countries are very different. So it's kind of meant that often if a company has been acquired in a different geography and then amalgamated into that overarching business, it comes with very different flexibility. And I think we are seeing some quite progressive multinationals amalgamate everything and it be all the same, regardless of kind of statutory requirements, which I think is quite exciting. And others that are kind of going on a very broad regional basis, but it's very fragmented. And to your point, like generally tech teams will get much more flexibility versus finance teams or sales teams. And I think we're collecting as much data that we possibly can from an industry, from a skill perspective, from a demographic perspective, in order to show, what the benefits of offering flexibility across all teams is, but also to show the benefits of doing it rather than fragmenting, which I do think it's incredibly important that companies have some form of top-down directive, because otherwise you have to train every manager on the benefits of flexible working, and personal opinions tend to very often get in the way of what is offered.
I think we've all got a lot to learn. It's an ongoing journey. So the future, I think, certainly from everything that I can see and what you're doing, you are part of the future. So I'm looking forward to seeing that bright horizon come to pass for us and for many other companies and the people who work in them. Because at the end of the day, we're all humans, and it's those other aspects of life that we need to be able to tap into that are going to keep us in the place quite different to the world of AI.
Yeah, exactly. There's so many questions to answer, and I think there's so much experimentation and evolution that we should definitely be embracing. And I think, one of the things that's really holding us back is a lot of leaders' fear of change. And I think that's something that we can hopefully provide as much evidence and answers to as possible, so that it feels a bit less like a step into the unknown.
Well, Molly, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. I know you've got a board meeting to run to very shortly, so really appreciate it. And I'm really looking forward to actually meeting up and being able to explore some of the challenges that we're facing and seeing how Flexa may be able to help us.
Yeah, and it's been a pleasure. Really interesting discussion, so thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of FounderMetrics. Remember, the biggest of ambitions are within reach when you leverage the right metrics and strategies. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and never miss out on any future ones. And don't forget to visit us on www.bested.com for additional resources, articles, and exclusive content. Join our growing community of entrepreneurs and founders by following us on LinkedIn, Twitter, X, and Instagram. We'd love to hear your thoughts and insights. Together, let's continue to unlock and share the metrics of success and create a brighter future.